Hello, and welcome to Integrating SEL into the Virtual Classroom, Part 2. My name is Anna Kay, and I'm one of the Behavior Support Specialists with Albuquerque Public Schools. This webinar is part of our team's webinar series that focuses on supporting virtual teaching and virtual learning. And today we're going to be talking about practical ways to integrate social emotional learning into your virtual classroom. This is Part 2. In Part 1, we talked a lot about just sort of the basic considerations when setting up your virtual classroom in terms of organization and layout, making sure we have a balance between academic tasks and tasks that support social and emotional learning, and considering ways that we can give students some autonomy and agency in choosing which tasks they engage in, or maybe the order that they engage in certain tasks. Today, during this Part 2, we're going to be talking about more specific ways that we can start to look at the Casel Wheel of social emotional competencies, breaking that wheel apart and using those competencies to guide some of the activities that we can integrate into our virtual classroom. So I have my virtual classroom. Now what? Again, as we find ourselves in this time of flux and change and newness, we want to make sure that we are really prioritizing building relationships with our students, establishing routines in our classroom, whether that be the virtual classroom or in some senses the hybrid model classroom or the face-to-face classroom, and prioritizing social emotional learning. Considering the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our students are experiencing more pervasive levels of stress and in some cases trauma. We want to make sure that we are creating a space that is built on the foundation of relationships with those students, because we know that students are best able to learn and thrive academically when they have a support system from their teacher and their peers. So today we're going to be thinking about that virtual classroom that you may have set up already, or your Bitmoji classroom, and ways that we can make sure that we are intentionally using that space to build relationships with our students, establish routines, and prioritize their social and emotional health. So how are we integrating the SEL competencies? As you recall from Part 1, I tried to stress that, of course, the academics are incredibly important. And of course, we are all feeling the pressure of the COVID slide, right? And needing to get our students sort of caught up, if you will. However, we also know that our students will not be able to, quote unquote, catch up academically if their social and emotional needs are not met first. So as we're building that virtual space and thinking about the tasks and resources available to students, how are we making sure that there is a balance between an academic focus and a social and emotional focus? I'll just briefly touch on this. We talked about this last time in Part 1, that we might consider setting up a calming corner so that part of our virtual space has an academic content focus and the other space provides students with some social and emotional coping strategies in this case. So they have some autonomy and agency in their ability to take a break from the academics, sort of reset their engine or return to a place where they are mentally and emotionally ready to learn before returning to the academic space. Another way to do this is just to create sort of separate social emotional learning rooms aside from the calming corner, so that students can enter this room and sort of almost take a break from the academic piece. However, within this break, it's a very productive break, right? Because we're giving them some tools to increase their social and emotional fluency, and in many cases, their self-regulation skills. So however you choose to set up your classroom, whether it has a space for students to take a social and emotional break, or a room designed with that specific focus in mind. We do want to make sure that when we're integrating SEL, we're using some of the tools available to us. You might be familiar with this image. This is the Casel Wheel of Social and Emotional Competencies. Casel stands for the Collaboration for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Their website is casel.org. And if you haven't visited their site, I highly recommend it. They have wonderful resources for teachers as well as parents. It's a really great place to start your SEL journey or find new tools as you are sort of continuing on that journey. And as we're integrating SEL, I want us to kind of think about how are we hitting all of these components: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So these next couple slides, we're going to talk about just a couple of examples of ways that you can break down each of these, each of the cogs of this wheel, and create some activities for students to engage in virtually. So let's start with self-awareness. This is an incredibly important skill, and something that even if students aren't face-to-face in front of us, we still need to give them opportunities to practice. So for example, we might have tasks for them that give them practice identifying emotions, creating and using I can statements, maybe opportunities to reflect on and share personal strengths. This is also a really great way to build relationships with our students. The more opportunities we give them to talk about what they do well, the stronger that foundational relationship with them becomes. And it also gives us some insight into their perceived strengths and how we can use those strengths to really build on those strengths and use those strengths in areas where they may have experienced challenges. This can also include sharing information about one's personal history or culture. So maybe in my Bitmoji classroom, I might have a hyperlink that students can click on, and they can watch a little video about me, right? And maybe even take a little tour of my kitchen or my bedroom, right? A place in my house. And I might be able to share with them some information about me and what makes me who I am, aside from just being a teacher. Then perhaps we could give students that same opportunity. Some students may feel comfortable recording the area that they live. Some students might not feel comfortable with that, and that's fine too. So maybe instead of recording, students could draw a picture. Students could write a short narrative that describes something that has occurred in their home recently. The more opportunities we give students to share information about their self, their culture, their identity, the more we can improve their own self-awareness and also build relationships with them, both relationships between teacher and student, and in some cases, student and student. And also part of self-awareness is opportunities to reflect on social and emotional skills, but also to reflect on academic tasks. So how are we providing some space where students can sort of have that self-reflection time that they share with us, again, to give some insights into their strengths and insight into areas where they might be experiencing some difficulties. When we're thinking about self-management, so an important part of self-management is using a variety of coping skills, right? So how are we providing some coping skills examples for students to practice in this virtual space? And how are we giving them opportunities to reflect on how those coping skills worked for them? Perhaps this might even be a space where students share coping skills that they use at home with their peers, maybe something that the teacher hadn't listed, but a coping skill that works for them. Goal setting is another important part of self-management. We know that sort of personal progress monitoring, there's a lot of research that supports how effective that is for many of our students. So thinking about ways that we can incorporate tools that students can use in this virtual space to set goals, whether they be personal goals, academic goals, etc. And then the teacher can use that information about those goals to really support the student, check in with them on how that goal is going, and maybe even provide some tools for that student so that they can track their progress toward that goal. This can also be a space that students have opportunities to reflect on coping strategies and their efficacy, or maybe even giving them time to practice using coping skills and teaching those skills to a family member or a classmate. Part of self-management is also time organization and space organization. So providing opportunities for examples, right? Maybe examples of ways that students can organize their space and time, or having that a little more open-ended and have students tell you input about how they are currently organizing their time and space, or maybe even sharing that information with their peers. So social awareness, this is a really important one. And in some cases, may be thought of as a challenge as we are not sort of physically together, but there are lots of ways that we can still encourage this social awareness in the virtual space. So discussing and celebrating diversity. Once we've created a space that is built on trust between peers, creating those routines and those spaces for students to really celebrate what makes them unique, skills they have, or stories about their family or their heritage. This could be integrated into part of your morning meeting, or even just sort of a Jamboard, a place where students are able to post information about themselves and their peers can take a look at it. Or maybe this is a writing activity that happens once a week, and then students have some options to share that writing either with their teacher or in some cases their peers. Social awareness includes perspective taking, right? So these are activities that we can incorporate literature, maybe looking at images and thinking about different perspectives within an image, and also talking about historical events and what were the various stakeholders and perspectives within those historical events. Also really giving students opportunities to identify what respect looks like, sounds like, and feels like in different settings. So maybe in the virtual setting or in the asynchronous learning setting, or even the synchronous learning setting. Sometimes when we think about what respect looks like, we might think of sort of classroom agreements or classroom norms. And maybe we can think about ways that we can have student input into what those norms look like in various settings, what respect looks like in those various settings. If students have some agency and some voice in helping to create those norms, it increases buy-in from students, but it also creates a space that is built on trust, right? It feels like teamwork has come together to create this space based on respect. Relationship skills, right? So thinking about how we are building relationships amongst peers. How are we teaching our students to actively listen in the online setting? And what does active listening look like online versus in the more face-to-face setting, right? So we might include some opportunities for students to practice listening to a peer and then responding, right, with appropriate questions or feedback. This is a really good way to build in sentence stems or I statements. Also thinking about ways that we can sort of involve solving problems as a team, even in this virtual space. So this might be done in a small group setting that the teacher monitors, or in breakout rooms that a teacher comes in and out of to check on students. Again, these relationships with peers and creating a supportive, trusting space is imperative for our students always, but particularly in this time of flux for many of our students. So really doing our best to create opportunities for them to engage with one another and use appropriate communication, problem-solving skills, and again, really demonstrate that respect for one another. And as we're teaching these specific skills, we remember that we need to teach them explicitly. We need to give students lots of opportunity to practice. And then we need to provide feedback or give students the opportunity to provide feedback to one another. It's also important that we maybe use this space to talk about how we repair damaged relationships, right? What does it look like to apologize in the online setting, the virtual setting? How can we make amends? What do those mean for students at their specific age level, right, or developmental level? Responsible decision making. So again, this is having students or providing students with opportunities to identify problems. A great way to do this is through literature, once again, or watching short video clips. We can extend this once students are able to identify the problems and having activities where students measure the size of a problem. Also, again, this is another way to collectively create class norms and expectations, right? This is kind of overlaps in that social awareness piece, that we're making sure that we're providing students with some voice in agency and in deciding what they need to do or what they agree to do as a group to make this virtual space safe. Particularly for our older students, really reflecting on ethical responsibilities in both realistic and hypothetical situations. So this can maybe connect to those ideas of measuring the size of a problem, but then taking it a step further, and maybe how do we as potentially a bystander, right? If we observe a problem, what is our ethical responsibility? How does that look in different situations? This could be a really wonderful opportunity to ask students um, to provide stories or experiences in their own life where they have been faced with an ethical dilemma and how they solved that. Again, the more opportunity we give students to talk about themselves and their experiences, the more rich this relationship building will be amongst teacher to student and student with their peers. And also just making sure that we're incorporating student voice as much as possible. Like I said in part one, agency and independence is really critical for our students. It always has been, right? Especially for our upper elementary students all the way through high school. As these young people are moving toward adulthood and are looking for more independence and autonomy, making sure that we're giving them the tools to use that independence appropriately, but also celebrating that independence, because that's a very important skill. This is even more important now as so many of our students feel that their lives are sort of, in some senses, more chaotic, that they might not have as much control over parts of their lives as they did several months ago before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So making sure that we're really providing opportunities to get feedback from students, um, especially if we're thinking about the context of our virtual classrooms, and maybe providing opportunities for students to reflect on their experience in that setting and talk about ways that maybe we could change it to better fit their needs. If students feel they are heard, that goes an incredible distance to really create, repair, or maintain those positive relationships that we are working to create with them. And before we wrap up, I know we took this tour in part one, but just in case you missed it, I wanted to just show you some of the Bitmoji resources that our team has created. So we're going to go to our website, which is bss@aps.edu. We're going to head over here to more and click on social and emotional learning. And we'll go down kind of past this gray band and you will see two different slide decks. This slide deck is designed for teachers. These are teacher resources that are that our team has created. And we put it in a Bitmoji classroom because that's just kind of a fun way to explore some of the resources that we provide. We've also created this Bitmoji student resources page. This is really designed more for our younger population of students, K through 4. However, for our middle school and high school teachers, this might be a place that you go and you just sort of explore what it looks like to have SEL specific Bitmoji classrooms or virtual classrooms. And maybe think about how you could just change some of the content, but still kind of have that same format and that same setting for your students. So these are available on our website. We encourage you to explore them, use the links, copy the links if it's something that would be beneficial to you. And again, please feel free to reach out to our team as questions arise. You can find us again at our website. There are places where you can put in a ticket requesting support, or you can email us, our whole team, at bss@aps.edu. We are here to serve and support you. We appreciate the work you do, and I'm very thankful that you spent some time with us today. We'll see you soon.